In the clip, it's in Warsaw, Poland, and these are Jewish people who basically the world has gone to hell, and the Nazis are taking over and killing Jews, and so they're terrified. But then you see one little pronouncement change everything. One little bit of knowledge, one little bit of information, they go from fearful, scared, anxious, to bringing out the wine, to bringing out the food, and having a party. And we've been talking about the redo in here. We've been talking about life pushing you forward based on your history and whether or not there's an opportunity to start over in life. And last week, every now and then I leave from church just feeling cruddy about my sermon. I don't know if anybody can relate to this where your work is concerned. But last week I got home and Kara said, "How did it go?" And I just said, "It went terrible." I just walked away just feeling like the life had been sucked out of me and like I had done a lousy job and that I had presented information that I wasn't even sure I believed. And it was just one of those weeks. And the interesting thing is I got more positive feedback from you guys about last week. So I should just preach crappy sermons all the time. And apparently it would really register with you guys. I'm thinking you guys really like to be beaten up because that's why I felt bad about it, was because it was a message about hope, but I ended up spending 80% of the time talking about the problem and 20% of the time talking about the solution. And so I think I just went away with this idea of temporal existential nihilism, that life doesn't matter. We talked about those concepts last week, that no matter what happens in this life is going to burn. We talked about the second law of thermodynamics, which I described as the second law of we're all doomed. And the sun is burning out, the earth is moving away from the sun, everything is going to grow cold and dark, and there's no getting away from it. And I walked away feeling that. That's how I felt afterwards. But I'm excited today because I get to now focus on the hope side. We've established, and if you weren't here last week, I would encourage you to go back. We've established that an investment in this world is an investment doomed to fail. If you spend all your time trying to build this life up and not concern much about the next life, you're investing in a system that is going down in flames or going down ice cold. We talked about how your physical body will decay, that there's entropy in the world and chaos, and your physical body, no matter how hard you try, no matter how much you exercise, no matter how clean you eat, no matter what surgeries you might have, one of these days it's going to stop. It's going to stop working. We talked about finances and money and the chaos in that system, and that when you invest in something, and even if you become wealthy, there's such a thing as wealth anxiety. That people that become wealthy start becoming overly anxious about how to protect their wealth, and how if you're invested fully in this world, there's no rich that's rich enough. We also talked about how our time is spent, and how if you have a sparkling clean bathroom at all times, it probably means there's something else suffering somewhere. If your bathroom is always sparkling clean, chances are you haven't learned how to play the guitar. And if you have learned how to play the guitar, then chances are you haven't gone for enough walks with your dog, and so forth. It's everything in life is a trade-off. And so there's this chaos, this entropy, that means you're always going to feel some regrets. In this world, you're never going to arrive at a point where you think, yeah, I've nailed it. And you shouldn't arrive. And then we talked about this passage from Lewis Carroll's work, Through the Looking Glass, where the Queen talks about, she says, in this world, you see, it takes all the running you can do just to stay in the same place. You can run. Anybody ever had a dream where you're running and running and running and getting nowhere? That's probably why that's in your psyche, is because that's reality. In this world, you're going to run and run and run, and you're not going to advance. It's still a world going down. And if you want to get somewhere else, you have to run twice as fast than you can. You can't run fast enough to advance in this world. And so this week, with that established and briefly recovered, this week I get to talk about the hopeful side. This one word that comes in, this one thing that happens that changes everything. In a world that's going to hell in a handbasket, one bit of information can change everything. So I'm going to talk about life on the hopeful side, and the picture will make sense in a little while. But Jesus seemed to be an advocate of the thought process that says this world is not the world to invest in. That the next world ties into this world, and that's where this world matters. But he would say things like this. Somebody would come and say, "Jesus, let me follow you." And he would make these really odd statements. He would say, "Foxes have dens, and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." So what he says when somebody says, "Hey, I want to follow you," he says, "That's great, but know what you're getting into." He says, "You're not going to be invested in this world anymore." He says, "I don't have a place to sleep at night." He says, I don't have a home. I'm not invested in this place. I'm going from city to city, place to place, talking to people all the time, and it's not going to be restful. You're not going to be in comfort and security if you're going to follow me, was his response. And then you consistently see him saying things like, it's not just about a lack of security, it's about you're going to die. He says, if you're going to follow me, it leads to death. He would talk about the cross. He would say, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself. So self-denial is built into the system. Self-denial, take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. I was at a store last night, Ben's Bargain Center up in southern Indiana. If you haven't been there, it's worth a go. Those of you who are laughing are the ones that have been there, I think. It's just a hoot. It's just amazing. But I saw this dude walking down one of the aisles looking for clothes, and he had a cross about this big. It was just a bling cross. I mean, it was just a big old silver cross on this dude. And we view crosses now as kind of a religious token. We don't realize the morbidity involved in that. If he was wearing a hangman's noose, we would go, man, that's an odd dude, right? We'd say there's something about that guy that's just off. And so when we're wearing these crosses, we need to try to remember what that stands for. And it stands for brutality. It stands for an awful, skin peeled off your body death that occurred in history. Now, why is that worth celebrating? Because when you wear a cross, that's what you're doing. You're celebrating the hangman's noose. You're celebrating the electric chair. And why is that? And I believe that's summed up in this quote from Ravi Zacharias. He says, outside of the cross of Jesus Christ, there is no hope in the world. And he says it in such a self-deprecating, gentle way. He could say, you're a sinner going to hell, and everybody would be like, yeah, I love it, because he's so gentle when he says it. He could say anything and get away with it. He says, the cross is the only hope for humanity. The cross and resurrection at the core of the gospel is the only hope for humanity. Wherever you go, ask God for wisdom on how to get that gospel in. Gospel means good news. So it's the good news of the hangman's noose, which doesn't make sense at all, unless you add this one word. Anybody spot that word in there? What is the word in this little paragraph that is the one word that reverses everything, that changes everything? Hope, yes, but hope without a focus is not the word I'm looking for. It's the word resurrection. It's that the hangman's noose doesn't win if the person cannot die, if the person cannot be left in death. And so this word resurrection is that word like we see for the Polish people in Warsaw when they found out that the British and the French were joining the battle, that they were no longer alone. And it changed everything. It turned the death, the anxiety, the packing their bags, not knowing where they're going to go, into a party. And it's the same situation with this resurrection word. It's the same situation. So if it's just a cross, if the world is going down in flames and that's where the story ends, that's bad news. But if the world cannot end for you, then it becomes gospel. And that's what that word gospel means. It means good news. It means everything has changed. And from the beginning of the Christian era, it's all been around an empty tomb. Death could not hold this person down. Death is not the end of the story. So when we think about entropy, and we think about chaos, and we think about existential nihilism or nihilism, and that really it's all going down in flames, if that's where the story ends, that's bad news. But it's not where the story ends. That's what Christianity has taught universally, is that is not the end of the story. So we've shown this slide and mentioned this little comment over and over for the past month and a half in the Redo series, is that you are here. You're in a world in turmoil. You're in a world that's going up and down in the waves. And you're going to have days where you feel on top of the world, and you're going to have days where you feel that you're at the lowest of lows and everything in between. And sometimes you're going to be feeling like you're jerked between them, like Kentucky weather. One day it's nice, one day it's awful, like today, for example. That's okay. That's a point that we've tried to make consistently through here, is that if you feel like your life is in turmoil, you feel like you've made some good decisions, you've made some bad decisions. Even your good decisions meant you were neglecting something else, and that just feels chaotic. It's okay to be there. But I want to throw in the hashtag here, not here as well. Because you are here, but if you're a resurrection person, if you're a person that cannot die, if you're a person that cannot be held down and cannot be defeated and destroyed, you're living in turmoil. You're living in a situation where one day it's good, one day it's bad. One day you feel like you do something good, and the next day you just feel like a total heel. That's okay. But if your identity is in Christ, that's not the end story. You're here, but you're not actually here. We've talked about how your past leads to the present, which is kind of confronted with the future pressing in on you, and how you're squashed in between right here, right now, and all you have is the right here, right now. All you have is this moment, sitting in the chair, holding some coffee cups, or listening to my voice. This is where you're stuck right now, and you'll always be in the right here, right now. And your past has led up to this moment. The decisions you made, the tragedies you've experienced, the treatment of others, the circumstances that were in your control and both out of your control have led you to right here, right now, and this is all you have, and it's all you'll ever have. And that is pushing you forward into this future of these moments that are all you'll ever have. And it almost feels uncontrollable. It almost feels like you are just a part of a process now that's pushing you forward. But we've made it very clear that that doesn't have to be the case. And so it's true, but it's not true. It's true that your past is pushing you forward. It's true that you're meeting in the middle and that the future is being unraveled. But it's also kind of not true because for resurrection people, you're not in this system anymore. You live outside of this system. You are no longer a slave to your past. The future can be absolutely transformed. You may have regrets. You may think, I wish I could do it different. I wish I could go back to when I was 12 and make a different decision, because if I had made that decision, everything would be different. Well, here's good news. Nobody makes good decisions all throughout. Everybody ends up in bad places because of decisions they've made. But Jesus, the author of Resurrection, the gospel of Jesus, proclaims that you can start over, start from scratch. It's not a redo. You're not going back and changing everything that you did, but you're breaking down the law of cause and effect. You are not a slave to what you were. You don't have to be a slave to what you were. You don't have to be who you were yesterday. You don't have to continue down the path that you feel like your history is pushing you down. That's the story of resurrection. It says you're dead. Go back to the grave. You're dead in the grave. You feel like there's no hope. It's dark, like the song that Andrew always picks really great songs on that seem to connect with the sermon. It's the darkest day in history. You can feel like I can't escape. I can't escape my past. I can't escape what I did. And what Jesus would say is, that's okay, why don't you just let all that die? Why don't you just let that go to the grave where it belongs? Because he is in the business of pulling people out of death into life. She's been described as a billionaire socialite. Anybody recognize the name Jocelyn Wildenstein? So, lovely girl, right? This is a picture of her when she was younger, quite beautiful, and she is known, and I don't mean to make fun of her. I mean, but it is an important illustration. She is known as as one of the people probably with the worst results from plastic surgery that is kind of a public figure. So this is her today, and I don't mean to do that. I really don't. But I do want to use it as an illustration that a lot of times what happens is we don't like who we were, and she was lovely. I mean, there was no reason for her to be concerned about her appearance at all. But she saw something in herself that she didn't like. So she tried to fix that. And then she saw something else, or she saw the results of trying to fix what she didn't like, and it didn't quite work out. And so she tried something else. And in her particular case, my understanding is that she is kind of infatuated with felines and wanted a real feline look, and so she's kind of lioness looking even today. But my point is, you can't patch up something that is doomed. You can't just step up and fix this and fix that. So a lot of times when we talk about the redo, we think, well, if I would just start doing X, Y, and Z, if I would just stop doing this behavior and start doing this behavior instead, then life would be grand. I would have no more regrets. And just like plastic surgery, you can work and work and work and try to make good decisions, and you just end up looking ghoulish. You'd never arrive at your goal when you're just trying to put a patch on stuff. My wife is super pregnant. Like, she woke me up at 4:30 yesterday morning with her contractions 7 minutes apart. She might wave at me and say, hey, we got to go. And I'm just going to say, hey, Lacey, would you take over? And we'll be out. I mean, it could happen any second. But 2 days ago, she's been nesting for quite some time. So our house is about as spotless as it's ever been right now because the baby is coming and the nest is prepared. I don't know what genetic thing goes on in her, but man, she's serious about it. So I take my shoes off when I enter the house at this point. But she was cleaning carpets up in our children's bedrooms 2 days ago. So she's about to bust, and she's still working so hard. And she told me the story of her uncle, Rick, who told her when he was a child, if you're going to do something, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing right. And how she has that in her head. So as she's cleaning the carpet, she knows that before you clean the carpet, you're supposed to vacuum the carpet. But she's tired and her back hurts and she's carrying a baby. But she goes ahead and she vacuums the carpet before she cleans it because Uncle Rick is in her head. Is if it's worth doing, it's worth doing right. And so when we talk about the redo, we don't want to sell it short. We don't want to just say, hoorah, go get them, guys. You can do it. You can live a better life. We want to, if we're going to talk about it, let's talk about how it really happens because it's not patchwork. It's not just a little fix, little. I thought this was funny. This is an ointment from an Asian country called Burning ointment, and it cools and prevents skin from heat. And I just don't want to rub that on anything. I'm convinced this is bad news. But when we're talking about the redo, we're not talking about taking a piece of cloth and sewing up a little hole. We're not talking about a little rash where you rub something on it. We're not talking about taking a pill. We're not talking about getting our fix. We're not talking about anything where it's just a temporary, life is chaos, and so I'm going to do this minor little thing to try to make everything seem better for a short little while. Or I'm going to do this minor little thing thinking it's going to revolutionize a culture where the second law of thermodynamics says we're all doomed. We're not looking for patchwork. We're not looking for a Band-Aid. And I'm not for... As a pastor, I want to avoid pithy little statements, little rhymes, or little slogans that try to get in your head. But this one came to mind, and I do try to avoid it. But this one came to mind, and we're not looking for a fix. We're looking for a fixture. We're not looking for a temporary hold or a little stay we're not trying to hold back the waves for one more day. We're trying for revolution. Jesus taught. He taught death to life. That's not, I'm kind of a bad person, now I'm less of a bad person. Or I'm kind of making terrible decisions, so I'm going to try to make less terrible decisions. Jesus said, you just got to die. He said, it's got to be over. Somebody else is in charge now. Somebody else has taken control. Somebody else has come into your war zone and fought the battle for you. That's what Jesus taught. It wasn't a patch. And so the picture here, There's a moment where Jesus is hanging out with his disciples. He's hanging out with his immediate followers. And somebody comes to him and says, hey, Rabbi, because Jesus was a Jewish rabbi, says, Jesus, why don't your disciples fast? So it was a common practice in Jewish culture, Jewish religious culture, to abstain from eating once or twice a week. So you would go 24 hours without eating. Well, Jesus and his disciples were just partying all the time. They were going out and eating together and enjoying food. And some of the religious people noticed, these guys aren't suffering. What's wrong with this situation? And so they said, Jesus, why don't your disciples fast? And this was Jesus' response to them. He said, how can the guests of the bridegroom mourn when he is with them? And then he goes on to say that I'm going to be gone in a little while and then they will fast. But right now, it's like a bride with the bridegroom. This is party time. This is celebration time. And so Jesus' message was, this thing is exciting. There is hope and joy in this. Just like a bride, like I remember getting married. I remember the first time I saw my wife, the day we got married, just what it's etched in my mind forever. And Jesus compares being with him to that. And then he goes on. It's really interesting. He goes on to talk about some stuff that seems completely unrelated at first glance and even kind of confusing. And we're going to start with a Seinfeld clip that I think illustrates Jesus' illustration a little bit, and then we'll go from there. So Jesus makes this statement about fasting and his disciples, and he says, and you guys are wondering, what in the world are we looking at here? I'll get to it, I promise. He says that when they're with me, it's like a bride with her groom. It's party time. It's a great time. And then he goes on to talk about wineskins and fabric. And these are ancient wineskins. So in Jesus' day, if you were going to carry around some wine, chances are it looked like you had a little pig strapped to your fanny pack, a little pig fanny pack. And that's what these are. And he makes this statement that it's really, really odd at first glance. He says, "No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth onto an old garment, for the patch will pull away, making the tear worse. Neither do people pour new wine into old wineskins, and if they do, the skins will burst. They pour new wine into new wineskins, and both are preserved." So he makes this fabric wineskin little connection here. So in the case of Seinfeld, he's got this shirt that shrunk down. It was not pre-shrunk fabric, right? And in Jesus' day, there was no such thing as pre-shrunk fabric. It was just fabric, okay? And so when Jesus says nobody takes a patchwork, something new, and patches something old, because what happens is that new fabric, what happens to it once it's attached as a patch? Anybody have an idea at this point? It shrinks, which does what to the old fabric? It tears it, okay? And he makes a similar illustration with wine and wineskins. He says you got these old, because wine, you just want to let it sit and ignore it. And with wineskins like this, you don't mess with them. You don't touch them, because if eventually the fabric is, the material is going to deteriorate. And so what he says is, if you're going to if you're starting a new batch of wine, you're not going to reuse the old wineskin. You're not going to take the old one that has already deteriorated in a great way and pour the new wine into it and expect to get a good batch. He says instead, that if you do that, the whole thing is going to burst and you're going to ruin all your wine. So he's talking about ruining something by trying to stick with the old, right? That's what he's trying to say. And so he's using the illustration that this isn't patchwork we're talking about. We're not talking about sewing something onto a piece of cloth. We're not talking about taking a pill. We're not talking about using an ointment. Instead, he's talking about total revolution. He's saying, instead, you start over. Christians, you hear the word born-again Christian, and a lot of people today hear the word born-again Christian, and they imagine televangelists with big hair spitting when they preach, and uber-conservative, politically motivated people. And the word born again carries with it some baggage nowadays. And I connect myself with some of everything I just said and not much of some of what I just said. I do connect myself with the phrase born again, and that's what Jesus taught. He says, you don't redo, you don't take everything that's been given to you up till this point and try to patch it up, try to sew something on it and make it better. He said, and instead just let it die. Let the past die. Let who you were, let it die, and let's be born again. Let's start over. Let's stop trying to patch stuff and let God revolutionize everything. And then he goes on his way. So he gets asked this question. He uses this little confusing illustration. And then as he's going, this Roman guy comes to him and says, "Hey, my daughter's dying. Can you heal her?" And he says, "Well, where is she?" That's Jesus' response. "Where is she? I'll take care of this." And while he's walking, this other woman walks up to him and touches him because she wants to be healed. And she is healed. And he turns around and this miracle happens where this woman she's basically been on her period for 13 years. She's seen doctor after doctor after doctor. She's spent everything she had. She's traditionally unclean by Hebrew Jewish standards. She's not allowed to enter the temple because she's perpetually on her period. So she's been ostracized from the religious community. She's been ostracized from the people she loves. She's unclean in this culture. And in one moment, she touches Jesus. And he turns around in a crowd. He says, "Somebody touched me," which is a really dumb thing to say in a crowd. And his disciples even call him to task on it. They're like, "That's a really dumb thing to say." He says, "Something happened." That's what Jesus says. He says, "Somebody touched me and power came out of me." And he looks down at her, and she's nervous at this point because all eyes are on her. And this is his response to her. He says, daughter, what a great word, an important word in this passage. He says, "Daughter, go in peace and be freed from your suffering." One moment. And then he goes to this Roman guy's house, and the daughter's been dead for some time. And actually, a servant meets them halfway and says, "Don't even bother the rabbi anymore." He says, "Your daughter's dead." He says, there's no sense in Jesus coming to the house. And Jesus' response to that, overhearing what they said, Jesus tells him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." So it's hopeless. Death is in the situation. There's no stopping it now. Death has already won. And Jesus says, "Chill, I got this." When they get to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus sees a commotion. There's people crying. There's professional mourners who have been hired, and they weep and wail, and they rub ashes on themselves and make a big spectacle out of somebody that's died. And Jesus says, "Why is everybody freaking out?" He says, "The child's not dead. but only sleeping. And they laugh at him because they think he's crazy. And then there's this beautiful passage. In where the child was, he took her by the hand and said, Talitha cum, which means, child, get up. Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. And at this, they were completely astonished. It's hard to find good pictures of Jesus, and I actually kind of like this one because he doesn't look like a super white guy, and he doesn't have a halo, and he's not standing like this in the picture for some reason. So I was pretty surprised to find that, and for some reason, investigating this particular story, you see several pictures, ancient paintings, or not ancient paintings, but medieval paintings that have been done where he looks like I see Jesus. I don't know why this passage has been preserved as far as oil paintings throughout history. But there's several. I particularly like this one because I think the little girl looks like my niece, Haley. I think as Haley gets older, she's going to look a lot like that little girl. And then Jesus has what I would consider the most gangsta moment of Jesus throughout all the New Testament. Now, I don't know if you guys have heard of the thug life, right? And I'm not condoning thug life or gangsters or anything like that. But thug life is what they'll do. So if there's a bully picking on somebody at school and some other dude comes up and clocks that bully, then the gangsta music starts, and then there'll be some sunglasses that fade in off the screen and get on the dude, and he'll be standing there like that, right? So Jesus has this gangsta moment. So he raises this girl from the dead. She's dead. She's hopeless. There's no hope for her. And he tells her, get up, and she does. And then he says, give her something to eat. And I did my own little thug life. So there's no hope. There's no hope. And he steps up and says, I got this. Right? And that's the hope side for you today. It doesn't get any deader than dead. There was no hope in the situation. Everybody was weeping. The father was devastated. And all Jesus has to do is come in and put on his shades and say, I got this. I raise people from the dead. And it's not just literal, it's figurative. He says, I don't care how dead you are. I don't care how far gone you think you are, or how bad that mess of your past has pushed you forward. It doesn't have to be the same tomorrow. You don't have to be dead tomorrow. That is the message of the gospel. That is the message of Easter. Ephesians says, in the past you were dead because of your sin. You fought against God. You followed the ways of this world. You were invested where the second law of thermodynamics says everything is doomed. Once we're also ruled by the selfish desires of our bodies and minds, but God was merciful. We were dead because of our sins, but God loved us so much that he made us alive with Christ. And God's wonderful kindness is what saves you. God's kindness is what saves you. Not patching, not working, not trying, not striving, but God's kindness in your life raises people from death to life. He has given us a place beside Christ in heaven. It's that phrase, he made us alive with Christ. I'm going to go a little bit long today. I hope you'll bear with me, but I want to go home feeling good, so I'm going to keep on going. So I want to talk about baptism for a minute. I know there's several people that are going to be baptized today, and we have a website or an email set up at questions@daylightchurch.com, and I got this question recently. It says, I've been taught my whole life, and I've so far understood the scriptures to teach that we ought to repent and be baptized for the forgiveness of our sins. Was I wrong? Is it necessary to do both, but not at the same time? Is it to pick one or the other? Is baptism superfluous, baptism by water, or the Spirit? And there's a lot of questions here. This person talked about how we talk about giving your life to Jesus in here a lot, but baptism is kind of put on the back burner. And so I wanted to address that just very briefly. In Colossians it says you've been buried with him in baptism, in which you were raised with him through your faith in the working of God who raised him from the dead. And so baptism is, in my opinion, it's a sacrament, which means it's a sacred ritual. It's along the lines of communion and in some circles, marriage. These are sacred things. They're sacred rituals that have a meaning far beyond the ritual. So the ritual is symbolic or illustrative is the word I'm looking for, illustrative of something going on inside you. So when you take communion, it's illustrating something beyond just the elements. When you're married and you give yourself to someone and you tie the knot forever, it's not just a ritual of connection, it's a ritual that is symbolic of two people becoming one flesh and joining together. And so baptism is similar to that. Baptism is about death and rebirth. It's what we're talking about here today, is the resurrection life. And so baptism is the idea that you go into the water to die, and you are raised up with Christ. And so one of the questions in there was, is it necessary? Is it superfluous? Do you just pick one or the other? And I compare it to marriage and sex, and I know that feels awkward to some. But my mom was married before my dad, and they never consummated the wedding, which means they never had sex after they said, I do. Instead, during the whole ceremony and then afterwards, she was thinking, I made a terrible mistake. I feel so bad for the guy. His name was Mike. I never met the guy. She didn't tell me until I was like 18 years old that this event even happened. But she got home and was just hands off. This was a terrible mistake. And so they actually had their marriage annulled. It wasn't a divorce, it was an annulment, because the government says, well, you tied the knot, you signed the papers, but you never consummated the marriage. You never did the ritual that kind of completes the thing and carries it through for the rest of your lives. And so that's why it was called an annulment. And so I consider baptism to the Christian walk to be similar to sex and a marriage. Is if you haven't been baptized, it'd be similar to going to a marriage and saying you haven't had sex. Sometimes there's medical reasons, and I don't mean to say that there aren't reasons why there couldn't be, but it brings into question. It's like there's something off here. If you've been married and you're not physically intimate, it doesn't mean you're not married. It doesn't mean you didn't sign the papers. It doesn't mean that you're not committed to one another or that the marriage is even legal. It just means there's something not complete. It could be frustrating if there's reasons for it, but it means there's something not complete. And that's how I view baptism. I view baptism as kind of the closing the deal type situation. Now, can you be baptized without being a Christian? Yes. Can you have sex without being married? Yes. Can you be a Christian without being baptized? I'm going to go with yes, but why? Why wouldn't you? It's like saying, can you be married without having sex? Well, yes, but it seems like something you ought to work on. It seems like something you ought to put high on your priority list to get fixed. There's a passage in the book of Acts, one of the very earliest Christians met a guy named Philip, and Philip explained the gospel to him that we've described. It's this good news that you can die and be reborn, that you don't have to live who you were, you can start over from scratch and be born again. And the eunuch's response to Philip was this. He says, here's some water. What's to keep me from being baptized? So he receives the message, he receives the gospel, and one of his very first impulses is to say, I want to do this ritual. I want to do this sacred, sacramental thing and illustrate my commitment to Christ. I want to go back in closing to Ravi Zacharias. And there's a whole lot, I promise, there's a whole lot more to be said about baptism. If you have other questions, please come see me. If you're being baptized today, you'll show up at my house a little bit early, and we'll talk through the procedure, we'll talk through the ritual, we'll talk through about the heart behind it, and hopefully there will be some more clarity about those sort of things. But Ravi Zacharias said, the hope of the world is this resurrection, the cross and the resurrection. And we need to ask God for wisdom on how to get that gospel in. How do we get the good news of death and rebirth into our lives? There's no super easy answer, but what Ravi Zacharias is here is talking about a process, is that we ask God for wisdom wherever we go, and even in the toughest situations of life, that the goal is Christ in. The goal is Jesus in us. And that's what resurrection is. It's you no longer live, but Christ lives in you. And it's a life of constant surrender to that good news.